Okay, I think we will get started. I want to welcome everyone again. My name is Emily Zilber. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships here at the Wharton Esherick Museum. I'm so excited for you to join us for today's Creatives on Esherick with Sam Olshin and Lisa Dustin from AOS Architects, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Again, ask you to mute yourself if you haven't already done so. First, I just want to mention a few Wharton Esherick Museum program notes. We've reopened for the season just a few weeks ago, and we really hope to see you on site very soon. 2022 also marks the 50th anniversary of the Esherick Museum, which is really exciting. There's so many wonderful things happening in conjunction with that, including our Home as Exhibition series. Home as Site is on view in our visitor center now, and it explores the physical nature and architecture of WEM's campus with images, blueprints, and other materials to really illuminate how the studio site has changed over time and in response to Esherick's evolution as an artist and a person. There are great programs connected with this, including a spotlight talk on March 22nd, focused on the crucial but little acknowledged contributor to Esherick's 1956 workshop, Anne Ting. We're going to explore the way in which Ting's lifelong passion for geometric architecture shaped the workshop. I'll also mention that our imprint exhibition for 2022 opened this past Sunday. This is our 14th annual high school print competition and virtual exhibition, also themed around ideas of home. You can find information about in-person and virtual exhibitions, as well as upcoming virtual talks and recordings of our past program on our website. And I'll nod here to my colleague, Larissa Huff, who is going to be sending a follow-up email. So don't feel like you have to write this all down, but if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and she will be paying attention to that while we're in conversation today. Also on view in Home as Site are materials on loan from our guests today, who are working with WEM to envision the first newly built additions to the site in 5 decades. So Sam Olshin and Lisa Dustin from AOS Architects, Philadelphia and Santa Fe, both worked closely with the Wharton Esherick Museum on our master campus plan, which was completed in 2020. We'll talk with Sam and Lisa today about their research and design process, how they worked in collaboration with Esherick's legacy and the site's extant architecture, and really what it means to rethink spaces and to develop new ones for WEM as we honor our 50th anniversary. Sam Olshin is a principal at AOS, a 25-person firm specializing in the design of a wide variety of institutional projects, including university, museum, school, hospitality, and religious commissions. He received a BA and an MArch degree from the University of Pennsylvania and has served as an architectural critic at Temple University, Drexel University, Philadelphia University, Villanova University, and the University of Pennsylvania, and since 1989 as senior visiting studio critic for the Introduction to Architectural Design course at Bryn Mawr College. Olshin was elevated to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects in 2020. And in 2021, he was awarded the Charles Bulfinch Award from the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art New England for his travel watercolor sketches, something I love because he was kind enough to loan us a watercolor sketch that's on view at the museum right now. Lisa Dustin is a principal at AOS Architects and was the managing partner for the recent campus master plan for the Esherick Museum. She manages many of the firm's projects that address complex programmatic, aesthetic, and contextual considerations for cultural and educational institutions. Recent project experience includes work at the University of Pennsylvania, Swarthmore College, the Loomis Chaffee School in Windsor, Connecticut, and First Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. She's currently working on the design development phase for a renovation for College Hall at the University of Pennsylvania and a framework study for a residential quad at Swarthmore College. So we will have about 25 to 30 minutes for conversation today. Again, I'll ask you to mute yourself if you haven't already, and then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions and conversation with Sam and Lisa. Please feel free to put questions in the chat throughout. Larissa is standing by, and I will try to keep an eye on the chat as well. And so without any further ado, I want to welcome Sam and Lisa to WEM's virtual space today. How are you guys?
Great. So happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. Before we get into your work with WEM, I'd really love to hear a little bit more from both of you about your path to architecture. When did you first become interested in this work?
I think for myself, having grown up in Philadelphia, I attended the Samuel Fleischer Art Memorial as a child and ended up going there as an adult. And then we actually ended up doing the master plan for Samuel Fleischer Art Memorial. So I think art has always been something I've been interested in. And then somewhere along the line, I had a feeling that maybe I could make a living taking the art skills and math interest and turning it into being an architect. That's how it worked for me.
So it comes from the art into the architecture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would say for me, my path was a little less linear. After college, I moved from rural New Hampshire to New York City and first worked in publishing and then as an investment banker for a few years. But when I wasn't working, I spent a lot of my free time exploring New York on foot and getting to know all the different neighborhoods and the buildings, that kind of shaped their character. I'd always been interested in architecture and I had taken classes in college. But I think it was something about the energy of New York's neighborhoods and the buildings that led me to take a summer course in architectural design at Columbia. And that was it for me. I was hooked.
All it takes is that one course, right? That one little thing to get your interest going. Well, so tell us a little bit more about AOS. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about the firm's area of focus. We talked about that a little bit in the bio, but would love to hear more about that, as well as the ways that you approach your projects and some of the things that you found most satisfying to realize.
So the firm just celebrated last year our 40th anniversary, and I have been here 34 years of that. Started here right out of graduate school and worked my way up from draftsman to being a partner here. And I think I've always really appreciated and enjoyed working for clients that care passionately about their own mission, issues of sustainability and energy efficiency, educational related issues, and clients who want to send a positive message to their own constituents. And I think that has been great for us to kind of get in the trenches and help to support the institutions that we serve. And we continue to be super busy right now, working with all sorts of fabulous clients in the arts and education, et cetera. And Wharton Esherick is right up there with the best of them. So it's fantastic to see the thinking about this continue to evolve.
Well, we've enjoyed working with you too. I can't tell you how much. So the feeling is mutual there. We've been working with you now for several years. As I said before, we sort of came to an ending on that master plan in 2020, and then of course everyone knows what happened. So it's been a couple of years now of not only the sort of work that we've done together, but also having things shift and change over the course of this sort of pandemic time. I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about your knowledge of and relationship with Esherick's work and biography before you started to work on this project, because I know now you're both deep experts and fully invested.
I'll respond to that one.
Yeah.
I think almost every architect in Philadelphia is familiar with Wharton Esherick and has probably made at least one visit to Valley Forge Mountain to experience the house and studio in person. The combination of Esherick's own iconic structure, where he, designed every detail himself, which, is pretty much every architect's dream, and built the whole structure by hand, and combined with the workshop designed by Khan on the site, makes it kind of a pilgrimage for architects in Philadelphia and, elsewhere, of course. So all of us at AOS have been familiar with Wharton Esherick for quite some time. I can't even tell you how thrilled we were to be asked to collaborate with the museum on the master plan. And, we jumped in immediately and spent as much time as we could on site and in the buildings and, in the forest, and have just really loved every minute of learning firsthand all we can about Wharton and his life and Sunekrest and the workshop and the evolution of the site.
Well, I think we're going to get into more of the research process a little bit later, and it's an exciting one. I'm curious if we can take a little bit of a step back and would love to know more about the partners that help you navigate the aesthetic, conceptual, and practical needs of a job like the one at Esherick or other projects that you've worked on. And I'm also curious to hear a little bit too, since we're lucky to have both of you with us today, about how you partner with each other on a project like this.
Okay, I'll start, and then Sam, why don't you chime in? I'll just say, a site master plan, and especially one for such a unique and historic site as this one, requires an incredibly careful balance of the buildings, the site, the history, and of course, a forward-looking perspective, because there's a lot that all of you at Wharton Esherick have as goals for the site and for your buildings and for your programs and for your interpretive planning. So for the master plan for the museum, we partnered on this project with D-Land Studio, a landscape architecture firm based in New York, as well as Object Idea, an interpretive planner with a great deal of experience with planning and exhibit design for historic properties. So those were our main partners for the project, and the three of us worked in collaboration with the museum, of course. And what we really start with is by asking a lot of questions together, like what should a master plan for this historic landscape look like, and these iconic buildings look like in a contemporary context? What are some opportunities to connect the farmhouse newly acquired with the studio sites at the top of the mountain, and what are some potential physical ways of engaging those two sites and the space in between them? Sunekrest was newly reacquired, so we thought about how can Sunekrest and those stories about Wharton and Letty's experiences at Sunekrest be tied to the studio and workshop stories, and just how can the site and all those buildings extend and expand the visitor experience. So those are some of the questions that, certainly not all, but some of the questions that we thought about. In terms of how we partner together, Sam is the design lead.
Here, Doug.
Sorry?
They choose your words carefully.
I'd say Sam, on this project, Sam was the design lead, and my role was more big picture. And I was more responsible for making sure we established the goals for the project up front, and that we constantly revisit those goals to say, okay, we're headed in this direction. Are we meeting those goals? The design goals, the programmatic goals, the schedule, the budget. So I like to try to put myself in the shoes of the institution and the client, and view it from that side, and then as well make sure that we're all working together as a team, all of our consultants, that we're all working collaboratively to meet the goals of the project. Sam, what did I leave out? Do you want to talk a little bit more about sort of the design approach?
Well, I'd only add that I think every artist is in need of a appreciative client, and I think that's the same with Esherick as well. It's perhaps why I feel such kind of kindred spirit as well. I mean, he worked on his own house for 40 years. It's very hard to have a client who is willing to wait 40 years for you to deliver a project to them. And so coming up with a vision and running with it and making sure you meet budget and code and life safety concerns is something that that is why a managing partner and a design partner need to kind of work together collaboratively. And that's why this is such a wonderful project with the two of us to really kind of team up to create hopefully something of some lasting utility and beauty.
Hmm. I mean, I'm struck by your use of the phrase kindred spirit to describe your feelings about Esherick. I'm curious about what allows that other than sort of these relationships that you uncovered in his work that resonate with your own. Is it things about the life and career or the nature of the studio site that really allow that kind of relationship?
I was thinking about his own life and how his parents had a particular vision for him, either a doctor or a priest, et cetera, and he really wanted the kind of the rejection of convention, which I thought was pretty fantastic, thinking about somebody who was so dogged in a particular pursuit of looking at creating something useful in a innovative and unique way. I mean, that is, I think, what every architect who's interested in design is doing, because we don't want to be like everybody else. We want to be able to deliver something that can be appreciated, but that is unique and site-specific, and that creates something that's so wonderful. And I think, again, to have reading about Esherick going into somebody's house and having them say, we want a table for 12, and he says, no, you want a table for 8, and sits on the floor and draws the kidney-shaped table. I mean, to be able to command both that kind of presence, but both listen at the same time, I think that's the kind of great thing about design in general, architecture, craft, painting, et cetera. How do you kind of find that thread that allows you to get up in the morning and to deliver something and have a level of conviction that's both appreciated and that you will be, you will have a patron for many years to come.
I think for me,
yeah, Lisa,
hard to
please.
escape, the wonder of a place that someone built over 40 years, where literally every element, the furniture, the staircase, the countertops, the coat hooks, has been considered and is, just the result of his incredibly thoughtful expression. But I think another really amazing thing about this site is how visionary Wharton's family was to first preserve it, and then how visionary the museum staff now is to understand, we really need to reacquire Sunekrest, and we need to put these pieces back together because we can extend the story in this way and provide more opportunity for people when they come to visit. And I think we have really just come to appreciate that as part of our work on the project, just how dedicated everyone is to making this the most amazing place it can be.
Well, clearly you both have done so much research, and you shared a little bit about some of the questions that you were asking before, Lisa, but I'm curious if we can talk a little bit more about the research process. And I know we have some images to use to sort of illustrate some of the things that you're thinking about. So if I can ask Larissa for you to pull those up, that would be great.
So this image is of our very first visit as a team to the site. And for a master plan, really for all our projects, we like to start with a process of familiarization with the client, with the institution, with their culture, with their goals, and in this case of the existing building and site. So we spent for this, this is one of many visits, but we spent time walking the site, meeting with the staff and others who support the museum to really understand, how does this place work? What are the goals for the future? What is the mission? And for the master plan, we wanted to understand what are the stories that are being told? How are they told with this, with what we have available to us on site, the buildings and the site. We also hosted some visioning and messaging and mapping sessions to facilitate sharing of perceptions among friends of the museum, the staff, and the board of directors. And then if you could go to the next slide, please, Larissa. We felt it was critical to understand the physical site and the buildings because they play such an important role at the museum and how the stories are told. So these are just some of the slides that ultimately ended up in the final master plan that document some of our research into the site. So these are aerial photos from Google Maps showing on the right the site as it exists today. And then if you go to the next, please. We were really interested in looking at the site over time and how it evolved in terms of, the kind of what exactly was on the site, and then how did that site relate to what was around it. So 1937, you can see Sunekrest with clearings to the south and the east and the west. And you can see I don't know if you can see on your screen, but the little dots to the west of Sunekrest, you can see Letty's formal garden. So, we read everything we could about the site and we researched physically what the site looked like so we could understand, how does the site help to tell the story of what was happening at the time. In 58, you can see the site now includes a studio with a clearing around it, and that was gave Esherick the view of the farmland stretching out below. And over time, you can see in 71, the image shows the forest closing in around both the farmhouse and the studio. So, again, just our research on the site helps us understand the evolution of the site as a way of understanding what was happening in terms of the stories. Next, please. So then with that information, we started to create our own drawings of what was happening on the site. So here in 1910, we show Sunekrest and the barn with some photos on the right from that time. And next again. In 1920, Esherick has now constructed the studio at the top of the hill. So we added that to our drawing. We have some photos from that time as well. Kids in front of the barn at the top left there. And again, next. Try not to spend too much time on these. In the 1940s, the studio's grown. It's a little bit more comfortable. It has more amenities and a front door added to the north. Again, next. In the 50s, Esherick has now collaborated with Lucan to build the workshop. And next again. And here we're showing the addition of the silo element now at the entry. So it has now provided, a visual anchor to the structure. And then our final slide is how the site exists today. And the upper site was designated, as probably many on the call know, as a National Historic Landmark in 1993. And the garage is the visitor center. So now with the reacquisition of Sunekrest, everything is now, one contiguous site again. And it's just really exciting to think about how can these two sites work together to tell the story? How can we actually engage the landscape to help tell the story? And, how can we really extend the experience for people coming to the site? I think that's our last slide in that series.
Yes. Yep. I think we'll leave that up just as a reference as we sort of talk through. Oh, sorry, Larissa, if you can leave that up, that would be great. Okay. You brought up the fact that we are indeed a National Historic Landmark for architecture at WEM. And I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to the kinds of special considerations that enter into thinking about a potential new structure or a new landscape, any kind of new building for a site that is known for its architecture. Whether it's the relationships between the buildings you're designing and the context into which they're going to be placed, which you've done this kind of incredible deep dive into.
Yeah, I think if there was ever a particular challenge to address that question, it is the Wharton Esherick site because of the sensitivity of every single building and the disconnectedness, there's seemingly disconnectedness between the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill. And I know when we were kind of wrestling with the program, the issues of the size of the building and wanting to fragment it so that it didn't overwhelm existing buildings was huge, and will continue to be a huge issue as this design process evolves. But certainly some of the kind of buzzwords that we were thinking about in this was, creating something that's both timeless, contemporary, complementary, something that was inspired by Wharton Esherick's own work, something that was purpose-built and site-specific and energy efficient, and probably most of all flexible, so that this building can host multiple different kinds of events, types of different things, and can be added to in the future as well. And I think those are the kinds of things that we were specifically thinking about for this project.
Mm. And so let's sort of talk a little bit about your design process, and how all of this research informed the next step that you were taking. And I think we can go to the next slide, Larissa.
So I think perhaps maybe because of both my interest in sense of place and the issues of going to Fleischer and both taking printmaking, etching, and wood engraving, lithography, et cetera, I really gravitated towards Esherick probably as an artist before as a craftsman. And I was struck by this particular image, not just because of sense of place, but also the element of surprise. So this is as if you were taking a walk in the woods and as if you had just stumbled upon this site, Esherick, and then kind of looking out to where they built the expressway in 1958, the woods beyond. And I realized that really Esherick's process of art and the element of surprise is not just in his artwork, but it's also in all the pieces that he makes, his furniture elements and his architectural elements as well. And I love seeing that as a common theme throughout everything he does. And I think for us as architects working on the master plan and the visitor center, the element of surprise and stumbling upon something that you need to go back and take a second look at is so important for this project. You go on to some of the other images as well. But I think, the Bach House is one of my absolute favorites. It's a shame the building came down when they built the Blue Route, et cetera. But to think Miller Meeks and House on the left and having this stair on the inside, again, the importance of having a patron who can appreciate something as organic as the stair on the right-hand side as a work of art. And, kind of reading about how Esherick, started in kind of an arts and crafts mode and moved to a cubist mode and then to an organic mode, and even this free-flowing where he writes about how he's influenced by Letty's dance and kind of pictures taken of her twirling around, et cetera. And you can really kind of see the notion of dance right in the step. It's really pretty fantastic. Next one. And so where that was the organic, I'm also kind of drawn to the more structured and cubist as well. This is also in the Bach House, and the notion of convex and concave and the stepping motion which casts shadows, which is so wonderful. And of course, as an architect who's trying to pick up from some of the elements that so distinctively Esherick, organic is much harder to do in architecture than the more cubist elements. So kind of looking at what makes it special and distinctive is certainly something that kind of grabbed me. Next one. And I think the Fisher desk, you're used to putting a desk up against a wall, but this is putting a desk up against a corner. It's very specific, and there's no question that this stool can only go with this desk, and the element of surprise of nothing is parallel to one another, and then what do you even touch to make it open, and when you do, even that is all elements come out. You pull them towards you or you open them up. It is just such a unique piece that is so wonderfully handcrafted and so inspirational. The next one, similarly so, with the this corner cabinet also for Fisher, that you would not think that it hinges on one side. And I can see these in the middle of the night, honestly, as buildings or building elements and building fragments. And what scale might they be? You can really interpret these in many, many ways as a building element. And then, of course, it's the notion of the role of an architect to figure out programmatically what works in a shape that may most be evocative of Esherick's own designs. Next one. I think this radio and phonograph cabinet is certainly one of my favorites. I mean, it's kind of cutting edge 1936 with records, and if you notice the dovetail joints, which I think are so great, and of course the lid is totally separate from the piece below, and the way there's two different woods that are used. I think it's just a magnificent furniture element that also be conceived as architecture. And kind of reading again about furniture and music, and this actually is a music cabinet. Esherick wrote about that, and I was thinking about architecture as frozen music, which is what Goethe said, and how the notion of interpreting again cabinetry as architecture and as an embodiment of Esherick. This was from a recent show that I saw at the Michigan Museum, and this is Marjorie Content's drawing on the left, but the correspondence between Marjorie and Esherick was just so fantastic as to have an exchange of artist and patron and furniture maker and patron, because if you just see the element on the right done, you don't understand the context with which Esherick was thinking about it. And I think as architects, our job is to think about where the building's role in the context around. And you can see great care is taken to think about the sill of both the makeup area and the window sills adjacent, and the dimensions, and reading the correspondence between the two, where Esherick actually went up and did a mock-up in cardboard, most likely, in the room, and then Marjorie Content writing about what worked and what didn't work. I mean, I love that kind of dialogue, because that's the making of a good client and a good artist craftsman. It's great just to kind of read that, and it's very inspirational. Next one. And I think this may be one of the other inspirational pieces. This is also Marjorie Content's piece. Again, if you look at this closed, you might look and then look away, but the fact that it hinges on the right, and the drawers are graded from the smallest to the top to ever so slightly bigger, all the way down to the biggest drawer at the bottom. It's just so incredibly thoughtful and considered about innovative ways to make something that's relatively mundane, a chest of drawers, into something that's so special and so inspirational that your eyes just want to linger on it. It's just fantastic. So those were all the kind of furniture pieces for inspiration, but there's no question that another architect before us wrestled with the same idea, and that was Kahn. And reading about how Kahn and Esherick deferred to each other for credit for this building, which I think is pretty fantastic. You got two guys with egos, no doubt, but they really wanted to create something pretty wonderful. And I was thinking about everything I just mentioned. When you look at what Kahn did in 1956, there's no question that the corners of the workshop are evocative of dovetail joints, and I think Kahn was really kind of thinking about building as an embodiment of furniture that could only be site-specific for this site. And I think how Esherick tweaked Kahn's design to have some curves, whereas Kahn was too obsessed with straight lines, like many, many architects are. But I think this also foreshadows, there's no question in our mind that Ann Ting, who's Kahn's partner in this project, this was a kind of test fit for the plan immediately above, which is Erdman Hall at Bryn Mawr College. It's really, the workshop is Erdman Hall on steroids, and you can see on the upper left how that same design turned into Erdman Hall at Bryn Mawr. The notion of these various cubes, spaces, became a wonderful dormitory for women. And Lisa and I got to work together collaboratively at Bryn Mawr on the last dorm that was built at Bryn Mawr, with a 50-year plus gap between Erdman and the new dorm that we built right across from Shipley School. So it's kind of great to kind of come full circle and think about this workshop, its influence on Erdman, and then how we followed that with the latest dorm at Bryn Mawr. So these were all great things to think about. So I think in the next slide, we kind of think about process a little bit. This is the kind of notion of where we are today, and we are so super early in the process, but the key issue is kind of creating a courtyard down at Sunekrest and the barn, so this can become an outdoor event space. It's the forecourt to a larger building, and you can see what we've been wrestling with this new visitor center in the process is how do we fragment it so that it doesn't overwhelm the existing buildings that are down there. And then this interpretive nodes along the way up to the studio at the top. These are all things that we wrestled with, continue to wrestle with, and kind of look at in order to tie the lower campus with the upper campus. And of course, the visitor center is at the lower campus where parking is, and so that we don't overwhelm Esherick's own studio and Khan's workshop building at the top of the hill. The next one talks about on this interpretive trail, these nodes and what they may be. And Lisa mentioned the consultants that we work with and the partners about how do we create a switchback trail and do something pretty great where you, at the bottom of the hill, there's the visitor center orientation area, and then you have these nodes along the way to learn more about Esherick and Khan and the process and wood, how wood is even derived and culled and dried before it turns into something, before you actually arrive at the kind of top of the hill to see Esherick's own studio. And this is kind of how some of these things evolved with some watercolors that I'd done, to think about both organic shapes on the bottom, thinking about this in section and plan, an elevation, you know, the embodiment of a piece of furniture, what kind of wood or ash or walnut, how we might do that, and then thinking on the left about how stone abuts wood, how if you have some protrusions in wood and you create, and where the sun wraps around the site, where shadows cast so that the building has some life, and then how do we think about sustainability and organic nature of a building coming out of the landscape with either a green roof, et cetera. How does the tree maybe even penetrate the roof? And some of the ideas that we are continuing to look at, where this is a building that can only be built on this site for this purpose of really honoring and respecting and calling to attention the important work of Wharton Esherick. This is the kind of, it's sketches in homage to Wharton Esherick, really kind of thinking about what the next step may be. And I think this is the last image, and this is kind of where we are kind of at the moment, thinking about that visitor center and creating I mentioned flexibility being so important here. You know, how can some of the wonderful pieces that are in the studio now that you barely can get far enough back from to see could be moved in and out of a space like this, where you can appreciate them more, see the landscape as a backdrop to it, have some better lighting, and then use some of the local materials, wood and stone, et cetera, and some photographs and some history to really make a destination point that can be used for lectures and presentations and rental opportunities, and be a special place and contribute to the Wharton Esherick Museum site.
Sam, thank you for sharing all of this with us. It's really amazing to spend time going through the process, even in this quick amount of time, from sort of the thought and the research all the way to the renderings. And while we're nowhere near done in terms of realizing a building on the campus, there's so much that's exciting here, that's giving certainly us internally lots of energy for the work that we do. And it's been wonderful to work with you to see the resources that we have on hand in new ways. You know, I'm curious if you and Lisa can speak to what's been the most exciting or surprising thing that you've learned through this project. And then I think after we touch on that, we'll open it up to questions from the group.
I guess I'll start. I think I was always amazed at the kind of full immersion experience of visiting the studio. There's really nothing like it at all. But what has been really striking to me is to understand kind of through the eyes of the visitors and hearing from the staff about, you know, what visitors say about their visits to this place is the power of the experience to touch you know, literally every single person that comes to the site. It seems like everybody who visits leaves transformed and just deeply inspired to somehow, you know, take what they have absorbed in the experience and then, you know, put it into their own lives, apply it to their own lives in some way. And I don't think I fully understood that before working on this project. So to me, that was incredibly surprising.
Hmm. Sam, what
I
about
think,
you?
Yeah, I really think, and kind of reading about this, the kind of notion of a life integrated with art, which is what has been said about Esherick. I'm jealous of that kind of notion, because I think it's just fantastic to be able to philosophically kind of think that way, and I certainly felt inspired by that. And I think the kind of increased relevancy of Wharton's work and everything, I think everything's kind of getting faster and more automated, et cetera. And when I have been out there numerous times, I find that I can slow down a little bit and really think and appreciate this so much more about what Esherick really kind of cared about, and those who were his patrons cared about. And I think for us, the challenge is now, can we kind of create a visitor experience that should be similarly profound, that I want people to leave here and know what we did or contributed to it, and feel moved enough that they can feel inspired and hopefully slow down and take the notion of sustainability and creativity and appreciate their role in the world as something that's very, very important, because all of us have to kind of make that difference. And I think this is a great opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you both for the time that you have shared with us today. Larissa, if you can close that out, and we'll come so that we can see everyone. Really, thank you for the time that you shared with us today, for your continued work and collaboration with us on this project, and for your generosity in walking through the extent of the thinkings thus far with us. If folks have questions, I would ask them to. We're a small enough group that if folks want to unmute and ask a question, we have time for a few before we have to head off today, or you're always welcome to put them in the chat, and we can get things rolling that way.
If I may.
Yes, hi, Rob.
I would just like to thank all of you for your tender loving care of the Esherick Studio and the legacy. I appreciate what Sam and Lisa have brought to it. You certainly have captured the spirit of the place, and I appreciate you maintaining the integrity of the place as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let me follow that up. I love everything you just discussed and showed. Would Wharton love everything? Were you intimidated along the way by encroaching on his self and psyche and creation and vision?
Yes, no question, feeling intimidated in many ways. And we just finished renovating Richard's medical building at University of Pennsylvania, designed by Louis Kahn. And I think every time we go near a master and Wharton Esherick is up there, I think you need to take measured steps with everything you do and be very considerate about it. And I would like to think that Wharton would approve of what we're doing, and at least recognize that we are trying to do our best to interpret and appreciate what he was trying to do.
I have a question here in the chat about any limitations of the National Historic Landmark designation and how they might impact the thinking.
Lisa, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I would say, we're absolutely very careful not to do anything that might impact the designation. So that applies to the buildings on the upper campus. And we were careful to keep that always in mind, so that there wouldn't really be any issue with that. So a proposed new building is on the lower campus. Should not really be a concern in terms of the designation in any way. We didn't really talk about it as part of our process, But we did also spend time researching each of the buildings and documenting the condition of each of the buildings so that the master plan could include improvements to the buildings that are there as well. So, you know, we're thinking about a new building, but we're also thinking about how do you carefully restore the buildings that are existing on site. So we documented those conditions and some possible work for those as well.
That answered my question. But it brings up another one, which is one of the site plans. It looks like a couple of the neighboring properties that are currently a residential use, which I don't think the museum owns. Are there any plans to expand the land footprint or buy back his 8 acres or anything like that?
There are no plans in our master plan to acquire any additional acreage. We're working within the existing property lines.
So that was just an accident that those other, like, you know, the tennis court across the way and the other
Well,
house.
we just showed everything that's within the environs so that we're understand that those exist.
And my final question is, can you fix Diamond Rock Road while you're at it?
I will say I didn't mention, we also had a civil engineer on our team, site engineering. And we did look at that intersection with them, and we are proposing some slight tweaks to the entrance to Sunekrest that will improve visibility on Diamond Rock Road as somebody enters and exits that site. It's pretty preliminary, but it was raised with us, and we clearly experienced it ourselves coming and going on the Sunekrest site. So to be further explored, but yes, some changes are planned.
And I'm going to put them on the spot here, but I hope that Sam and Lisa will do additional programs with us as things move forward so that we can keep folks informed and hear more about their process as we continue to work together. I want to thank everyone for their questions today and for spending time this afternoon with us. I want to thank Sam and Lisa again for being so generous with their time and with for lending their talents to this project. It's really they're fantastic collaborators, and just want to thank you guys again. I hope that folks will come visit us, come spend time at the site, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a recording of this talk, as well as lots of links to the things that we spoke about today. So I just want to thank everyone again for attending, and I'll ask folks to do what we typically do at the end of an Esherick Zoom, which is to unmute yourself, say goodbye, and head off into your day.